It's time for another edition of Lewis at Large with Warner Lewis. 60 minutes of smart talk radio with interesting guests from all walks of life begins right now. So sit back and enjoy. And now, from the flight deck, here's your host, Warner Lewis.
Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Lewis at Large. This segment, it's going to be a good one. Of course, Smart Talk Radio is in your future. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck here, and our special guest this segment is Molly Chester. Who is Molly Chester? Well, she knows her stuff. We're going to be talking about food, and good real food. Brand new work called Back to Butter. It is a traditional look at what was once considered possibly maybe unhealthy, but she says no, it is healthy if we do it right, and it's going to be an interesting talk indeed. She's a graduate of the Natural Gourmet Institute of Health and Culinary Arts in New York City. She also worked as a personal chef in Hollywood. She and her husband embarked on a brand new organic and biodynamic farming project in Moorpark, California, a couple of years ago. Apricot Lane Farms comprises 160 acres and is being designed to provide a voice and platform to traditional and ecological farming techniques. That's a mouthful. Molly, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on.
You bet. Let's do this. We have had cookbook authors on here before. We have had talked about natural food and sort of a return to sustainable and organic eating, so to speak. Let's start with you a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about your early career and what you did with not only in Hollywood but also as a chef.
Sure. Well, I did go to the Natural Gourmet, which teaches you about 60% how to cook, and then 40% you're actually in the classroom learning the health supportive aspects of the food that you're working with. And once I finished there, my husband, who is a documentary filmmaker, was working on a project out in Los Angeles, and I wanted to private chef, and really this is where people need private chefs. So we moved out here, and I really hit the ground running. I think because at the beginning I called myself an organic personal chef, and it worked, and people just were looking for that style of food. So I was able to kind of navigate myself pretty quickly into the world of Hollywood, and I did that for many years. And then my husband and I, as we got further and further into what is kind of healthy food, you realize that it's all about the farmer's choices. And so we were having trouble getting good eggs, as something as simple as that. We wanted the eggs to be on grass, or the chickens to be on grass, and we wanted them to be eating a proper diet, and that just wasn't available. So we jokingly talked about wanting to farm, and then we made it seriously, started talking about it, and then we got this opportunity to farm on this really massive scale it has an investment backing, so we're able to do a lot of experimentation, and it's 160 acres, and it's just become this dream come true where I really get to see how the farmer's choices are affecting that nutrient value of the food.
What was your sort of, and again, this isn't Hollywood Insider, trust me, but
yeah.
I'm curious as to what your takeaway as a chef and someone certainly sort of outside looking into Hollywood. What was your takeaway from that?
I actually had very, very good experiences. All the clients that I worked for, I did a couple of interviews where it wasn't going to be a fit for me, but I think if you're kind of just choosing to work with people who are respectful in the process of hiring you, that it tends to carry over into working with them. So I had really wonderful experiences. Most of the people that you work for are just living very, very full and busy lives, and so it's just that they need help, they need support. So you find some meaning in the fact that, your hard work is just enabling them to live their creative life. So, and I found that all my clients were very, very interested in food. They actually, as I grew from an organic type chef and focus into traditional foods, which is what this cookbook is based on, I found that the clients were growing with me. They were learning the same kind of knowledge as I was, and so it was, it's just good to see that this type of community is really embracing that type of food because it does spread. The magazines do talk about these people, so it's good whenever they're starting to think about sustainability in food as well.
So in some ways, Back to Butter and sort of your evolution as a chef is running a little bit, at least on paper, against the grain towards necessarily vegan or, quote, organic and more just towards real good food. Is that correct?
Organic is definitely a part of it, but as far as vegan, it's definitely not a vegan diet. I was a vegetarian from 9. I told my family that I was going to be a vegetarian at 9 years old, and then through to, I think it's like 27 or 28. And my health actually went down in that process, so I have a lot of kind of personal understanding of what the mindset is that I never went vegan, but I did do vegetarian, and what causes you to go there, because it's difficult to think about some of the cruelty that can be involved in eating animals, and for me it was almost just a mental thing of biting into flesh. It used to bother me, and then as my health was going down, I realized that I needed those animal products. I could not find and sustain my health without them. So as I started to learn that about myself through my own trial and error, I kind of came upon this style of food that was really looking back to how people ate food many, not just our grandmothers, but thousands of years ago, and were able to maintain health and longevity with being cut off from or not able to get modern conveniences, no modern medicine, things like that. And there were principles of soaking and sprouting and fermenting and animals grazing on grass and dairy that is from animals that are grazing on grass, and all of these principles that are really kind of vitally important to each food group. So it's like if you are going to be eating meat, there's a certain type of meat that's going to sustain your body better than others. If you're choosing to eat dairy, then there's certain types of dairy that are going to do better than others, and so on and so on. And then so it's the actual choice of the food that you're getting, and then how you're preparing that food in the kitchen. So it's really, to me, kind of the root of all diets, because no matter what diet you choose, even if your diet it is better for you and your body that you eat less meat and that works for you, then still these principles should be applied to that diet which you're choosing.
If you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis, from the flight deck, of course, of Lewis at Large Radio and Smart Talk Radio. Indeed, this segment we're talking about eating, and we're talking about traditional foods, indeed, by none other than Molly Chester, longtime gourmet cook to the stars, so to speak. But she and her husband embarked on a new exciting project in California, not the least of which is a new publication called Back to Butter, a Traditional Foods Cookbook. Molly, talk about, in general, from where you sit, because, again, you went from vegan to now back to a more traditional diet, although probably prepared much differently. But from where you sit as Americans, where are we missing the mark with what we're eating? Well,
just for clarity, I never really went all the way to vegan. I was a vegetarian, which is slightly different.
And you snuck in a Snickers bar, too, didn't you, every once in a while?
I did like those as well. But I grew up, I actually wrote this cookbook with my mom, and I grew up with a mom who remembers what eating non-processed food was like. That's what her childhood was like. But then it became that processed food was a good thing, and it was, you were being a good mom if you were using some of these products, and that's what I grew up into. And then now it's kind of coming out the other way. And I think that everyone, the United States and the world is starting to wake up to the fact that it's just we aren't necessarily eating food. That's really the danger in it, that our labels, people now know to read their labels and things like that, that there's just not, a lot of these are food products. They aren't actually food. And so that's really the simplest first thing to do. And I think that that's being awakened across the United States, and that there's people starting their own gardens, and there's people going to farmers markets, and all of those kind of principles are taking root, and it's just stronger and stronger. I mean, my husband and I have done many different types of projects over the years, and then we started this farm, and we simply started a Facebook page, and now the Facebook page is up in the 30,000 Facebook likes, and we can't even understand it because we've been trying so many different projects to market them, and this one you just throw some pictures of animals and you talk about what we're doing, and we don't even have the time to be able to put a lot of effort into it, and people are just responding. So I think it's inevitable that the United States is waking up to food, and it's actually just very exciting.
Well, indeed it is. Again, as you look around the landscape of new cookbooks that are coming out, particularly those that are aimed at a sort of using more natural, sustainable. And I know that's not your complete angle here, but where do you position Back to Butter? Where does that fall?
Well, so let's see. It's definitely not a vegan cookbook and not a vegetarian cookbook. It is. I consider it kind of the core health cookbook because it can be applied to all the different diets that are out there. So it falls somewhat in the world of a paleo, except it does have grains and dairies, and paleo often doesn't have that. And paleo is kind of a new buzzword for going back to a caveman type diet and much more kind of hunter and gatherer type diet. But this is sort of a place you can go that's right in the middle of all those things. It's a little bit, I find it to be a very stable approach to food because it's not very fad-based. It's kind of rooted in history, but then very open to, we talk about dehydrators in there. That's definitely not something that our ancestors had, things like that. But it's kind of the basis for any other diet that you want to choose, if you want to choose another diet. And if not, this type of food can just sustain your family. It's about maximizing the nutrition in your food.
So, and again, as you look through it, there's everything from recipes for baked potatoes to poppy seed chicken casserole. So, as you said, it's not necessarily vegan. It is certainly using real food, and that interesting transition that you said, if you're a baby boomer, from when you were very, very young, of eating sort of real food, so to speak, that came from the store, and then probably beginning late 50s, early 60s, and through the 70s and 80s, lots of processed stuff, and then sort of returning back to that, but not all the way to vegan. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I would say that's totally fair. It's returning to the diets before processed food, but even beyond, with just adding all these different techniques and principles that maximize the nutrition in the food. It actually was where I began this whole journey was I learned about an organization called the Weston Price Foundation, which Weston Price was a dentist in the early 1900s who discovered that it just saw that his patients' teeth were going worse. They were becoming worse and worse and worse. And he knew what they were eating, and he wanted to figure out how cultures that had healthy straight teeth and wide jaws, things like that, what they were eating. So he traveled the world with his wife and found all these different cultures and really found common threads within them. So a big piece of the pie is fats, and that the vitamin A and D and vitamin K2 that are found in saturated fats and things like organ meats and all the banished foods and things that we think are kind of gross, but he found that these vitamins were what kind of restored and maintained health through his research. So a lot of traditional foods is that's why it's like kind of the things we think we aren't supposed to eat are actually the things that we are, because fats are so important, and we've demonized fats so much in our culture. And where kind of things went south with the United States, I think, is when we came out of World War II, and understandably, I don't like to look at it like everything is based on greed, but I do think that as a society, we were looking for a less expensive way to do things, and that marketing and advertising simply followed that and was really pushing cheaper alternatives. And animal foods are very expensive, and vegetable foods are much less expensive. So we started, and in the kitchen, once you learn about fats, you can't use a vegetable fat at a high cooking temperature, or else it'll smoke and burn and become rancid. So we started refining those vegetable oils so that we could use them at this high temperature, but it's a cheap way to replace the animal fats that used to be used at the high temperature. So once we started doing that, the refined vegetable oils became everywhere. So even today, everywhere you go, you're eating refined vegetable oils. And those oils cause inflammation in our bodies, as well as sugar does. And so they've replaced the fats with this, and then they've added sugar into everything because they've reduced the fat. And fat is what creates flavor. And then we have all of these foodstuffs out there that are causing this inflammation. And as side note, we've lost the nutrition of this vitamin A, D, and K2 that came from our animal fats and maintained our health. So it's kind of, we're kind of in a rough way as far as that goes. But again, because we're awakening across the country, I think it's just a matter of time, and we're going to get there.
So what you've got is, well, first of all, our listeners, I know, are taking copious notes about all this. But anyway, so what you have is a sort of a nice combination of the sort of things that people can buy readily at the grocery store, but they could also get, if they want to step it up a little bit, they can get it at a local farmer's market for sure.
Absolutely.
And so this is not a radical change in the diet. It's really using the resources that have been all around us that people still like. If you're a meat eater, there are things in Back to Butter. If you're a vegan, there are things in Back to Butter. You sort of, I suppose you could hand pick it. Share with us, if you would, Molly, maybe one of your, maybe a favorite recipe for a meat eater, a meat dish, and then one maybe that's more traditional for a vegetable eater.
Okay. So I would say probably one of the easiest and most crowd-friendly, like a crowd pleaser in the book, is sticky chicken, which is just a kind of honey mustard butter sauce that's on, this is simply chicken breasts, and that's kind of abnormal for the book because I do use more different parts of meats because it's important to use the whole animal when you're cooking. But this is kind of for somebody that's been using a lot of chicken breasts and they want a simple way to step in. That's probably a good place to start. And then for a vegetable dish, let's see. I'm opening the book as we speak. There is kind of a whole vegetable chapter, as we call it, from the garden as far as main courses go. And there's a mushroom marinara that's really, really good. My sister-in-law made it for a version of that for a ski trip we were on one time, and she loved it, and so it made it in the book. And then also there's a coconut, black beans, and brown rice. So this is an example of where it's like a beans and rice that people may know, but it's the beans are slow cooked beforehand and soaked, and that reduces the phytic acid in the beans, which is something that blocks mineral absorption in our body. So it's treating those beans properly before you prepare them that's going to give you the health benefits of the food.
You know, one of the challenges, and we have had several organic and in vegetarian cookbook authors on in the past, and the whole return to fresh food and sustainable. One of the challenges, of course, is the perception, real or imagined, that this kind of food is much more expensive, okay, than what they would find in a traditional grocery store. Share with our listeners, if you would, Molly, a little bit, as I look at the ingredients that you call for in this cookbook and in this sort of diet that we're talking about, talk to us about where does it fall on sort of an expense sort of timeline or process line.
Yeah, I totally understand. In the traditional foods world, there's lots of bloggers and things like that, and there are so many moms, families of, because this type of food, a lot of farmers are drawn to this. So this might be larger families. A farmer, often it's not like they're rolling in the money and it's a little bit harder to make ends meet sometimes. And they're making this diet work because once you get further and further into real food, you aren't buying the processed packaged food that has less nutrition and more packaging and therefore expense. You might find a local farmer and you're buying large cuts of meat. You might even go in with a family and literally buy a cow and have those cuts prepared and in your freezer. So it's a change of mindset. But when you get all the way there and you keep going with this food, I would argue that it may be slightly more expensive, but it is doable for a family that's making ends meet. And in the meantime, you're getting so much more nutrition that I would say this is going to be replacing some of the line items of medical in your budget with food. So I do think that food in general needs to become higher on our priority list. Whenever you're preparing things in the way of traditional foods, it takes more time, which becomes more of a family event, and your evenings are your food preparation rather than television. It does become different.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that. I do want to explore that one. That's another one. And I've asked this question of many authors, and particularly of cookbooks like this, and that is, the mom goes, well, you know what? I guess if I make movies, I've got all day to do certain stuff like this. I actually work till 5:30. I pick up a child from soccer, then I deliver them to a piano lesson, and suddenly everyone's finally around the table around 7:30 or so. When in the world do I have time to spend all day or part of a day really cooking? So help us with that a little bit. It's
difficult. I would say that's an issue because we don't have a person right now, whether it be male or female, designated to the nourishment of the family. There are simpler ways to involve this type of food in that you can actually order stocks now online. You can buy meats from online resources that have wonderful, amazing meats. In certain larger cities, you can even find people that are cooking like this, so you can have deliveries. However, all of those things are the more expensive way to do it. If you want to do it less expensively, then you have to do it yourself. So for the mom who's making ends meet by having that second job, that is very challenging. The best thing that I would say is to get involved with their local chapter of the Weston Price Foundation, which is the organization that inspired me so much, and get connected to other moms and find creative ways to support each other to be able to involve this kind of food. It sounds a bit radical to think about taking it so seriously of food preparation that you do things like that to make sure you're getting this type of food in your family. But once you start to recognize how much this food can support your family and how many health issues can be mitigated by focusing on food, it makes it so worth it. There's no other option.
Well, the work is called Back to Butter, Cooking Traditional Foods. Molly Chester and her mother are the author, both with a long history of cooking traditional food. Molly, as we kind of begin to wind down here, what's kind of the lesson here? If I'm the Lewis at Large listener right now, I'm thinking, okay, this all kind of makes sense. What's special about this? What eye-opening takeaway from this book am I going to get?
I think probably the thing that I hope people take away is that, one, it creates that aha moment that what you eat affects how you feel. Many people have already had that nowadays, so that's a very good thing. If they have already had that eye-opening moment, then I hope that they might get inspired to be connected to their farmer, because there's so many choices that a farmer makes that affect how we feel. And if we can start to support those farmers that are trying to do it right, that are trying to nurture their soil and nurture the land and create more nutrients in the food that they're growing, that would be such a wonderful thing for our community. Because we're never going to get rid of the large grocery stores, nor do I have that desire. I think it's wonderful to be connected as a world on a large scale. But we need to maintain that connection on a small scale. And that's where the real nutrient and artisanal food is going to come from. So if we can find a farmer and start to use them, that would be a really great thing.
All right, last thing is tell us about a website and how can people get a copy of the book?
Sure. They can go to my website, Organic Spark. The book is sold there. It's also sold everywhere books are sold, so Amazon and, any bookstores, Barnes & Noble, things like that. But my website has a lot of other recipes on it as well. I do write a journal on there that has pictures from the farm and things like that. And so it's a great way to stay in touch with me if they would like to.
All right, Molly Chester, best of luck. Again, the work is called Back to Butter, published by, I just had it right in front of me, and I've lost the name.
Fairwinds Press.
There we go. Fairwinds
Yep.
Press. There we go. Hey, listen, good luck with that. And again, a new work comes out we need to talk about. Let's have you on again.
Absolutely. I would love to. And one last note, for any musician fans out there, the foreword of this book was actually written by the musician Beck, who is a big supporter of traditional foods. So people might find that interesting as well.
Good to know. Hey, thanks so much, and have a great week.
Okay, thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it.
You bet. We will be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.